Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today, Ways that COVID-19 is Reshaping Cybersecurity. What a timely webinar, I think, during the times that we're living through right now. So hopefully everybody has a chance to enjoy the discussions that we will have today. And I am pretty sure to have some really good takeaways at the end of the webinar. So thank you so much for joining and hope you enjoy. So we are our firm, GRF CPAs and Advisors. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C. We are a full service CPA firm, and we have been servicing clients for about 39 years, pretty much in all realms of audit, accounting, tax, and also advisory solutions. And we have been servicing the for-profit as well as tax-exempt organizations, not just here in the U.S., but pretty much all over the world as well. So we're happy that you can join us and enjoy. So Darren?
Sure. So my name's Darren, and I'm an IT and risk analyst at GRF CPAs and Advisors. And I'm going to start off today with some quick housekeeping items and explain to you what you'll need to do to get CPE credit. Participants seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will automatically appear immediately following the webinar. You will be asked to recall the words in order to receive credit. Please write down the CPE words when they are given and keep them until you receive your CPE credit. They will not be provided again. If you have any technical questions or issues during the webinar, please use the question function to speak with our webinar administrator for assistance. The slide deck and recording from today's webinar will be available for download at the link shown. You'll also receive a follow-up email with direct links. Technical support and CPE questions may be addressed to Nathan McElveen at grfcpa.com. Today's learning to, yeah, you can go to the next one, Nathan. I just went over the CPE. Okay. I would like to introduce today's presenters for today's webinar. Melissa Musser is a risk advisories principal here at GRF, and Ricardo Trujillo is a partner in the audit department. And as you can see, their email addresses are here, so if you have any follow-up questions directly for Ricardo or Melissa correlating to topics they may have spoken about today, you can jot down their emails now and shoot them an email afterwards. And then I'll turn it over to Ricardo.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate it. Yes, my name is Ricardo Trujillo, and as Darren said, I'm one of the partners at GRF CPAs and Advisors who leads the practice in the risk advisory along with Melissa. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to cover some good topics here, and I think very relevant in today's environment that everybody's living in right now. So as I said before, hopefully everybody gets some good takeaways, but if there is any additional conversations that need to be had, we're more than happy to have them at any point in time. So I figured I'd start the conversation or presentation with a video that has been put together by Cisco. So if we go to the next slide, Nathan. Cisco has put together this great video that talks about how easily it is for hackers to really infiltrate today's infrastructure in organizations. So let's just take a look at this. It should be short, and then we'll get back to it. It seems like we're having a little technical difficulty there. Is it playing for everybody? Thank you, Nathan. So hopefully everybody had a good chance to take a look at that video, and you could see how scary some of the situations could become very quickly. So Cisco put this great video together, as you noticed, and it's just amazing. Every time I watch it, I've watched it many times, and every time I see it, it just still hits me pretty hard. But anyways, one other thing we wanted to point out is the FBI really comes up with the Crime Complaint Center, or the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center comes up with their own Internet Crime Report, and this one is the most recent one that was released in 2019. So the most prevalent crime types that were reported were phishing, vishing, smishing, farming, and also the non-payment, non-delivery, extortion, and personal data breach. Now, the top 3 crime types which had the highest reported losses were the business email compromise, or BEC, as well as confidence and spoofing. So it's not a surprise, right? Everybody is trying to get into information and systems through the business email and those kind of platforms. So it's going to be, and we can see that the total complaints just continue to increase drastically from 2015 to 2019, as well as the total losses, amounting to about $10.2 billion, in the last 5 years. So it's pretty interesting how these numbers continue to escalate, and they're just going to continue to be bigger exponentially. Let's go to the next slide. So talking about digital transformation risk, this is a big topic item in the cyber environment, especially now during COVID, when organizations are trying to move to a virtual environment. And it would have been nice to have really talked about digital transformation prior to the pandemic, but it never is too late. And I'm sure organizations are scrambling right now to figure out, how do we move to the next level? How do we go to the cloud environment? And organizations are basically embracing that modern technology. And like I said before, it would have been nice if it had been prior to the pandemic, but it's never too late. And organizations, and with this come, third-party risk, operational resilience, Internet of Things, which was looked at during the video that we just saw. But organizations also have to think about on this transformation, because this could be the difference between moving on or not moving on. I mean, Lego was a pretty clear example. They had to reinvent their platform and their business because they needed to do something different to pertain the talent and to bring new customers to their toys. And they decided to open up new amusement parks and stuff like that to really stay in business. So again, key important topic here to take away, but brings also cybersecurity risks with it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa, because she'll have some other good points to discuss. Melissa?
All right, thanks team. Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Musser, Principal of Risk Advisory Services at GRF. And yeah, the landscape has changed. So is who owns information security. So as Ricardo was talking about digital transformation, and even as it relates to, the accounting function, it used to be, and it is still this way for some organizations, but it used to be that IT, all the information would be on a server, even your accounting system, and it would all be there, and IT would control access to that data. So they really had the keys to the kingdom. But now in this new environment, we have all these cloud providers, and maybe your accounting system is now in the cloud, and IT has no access to it whatsoever. Actually, who's granting access is sometimes the CFO. So in a way, you're kind of, providing, information security. You have to control who has access, provide that access on a need-to-know basis. You may actually have integrations from other third parties into your accounting software. Now it gets even more confusing, and you may need to grant access to that as well. And IT again, or if you outsource your IT, they also have no purview into that. So, who owns information security? And we work with a lot of organizations, and I like to sit down and make sure everybody's on the same page. Ideally, you would have a chief information security officer, but that's really for like the big organizations, not, smaller organizations just can't have that. I do think it's ideal to have some sort of committee. Typically, that was known as an information security committee, InfoSec committee, or a privacy committee. But really, kind of now, what we're seeing is an enterprise risk management committee, where maybe during COVID, many people within the organization have got together to try to figure out, okay, what do we need to do to be online? How do we keep people safe? Maybe keeping that going. So form some kind of committee that has, finance involved, IT, or if it's outsourced, your outsourced IT service provider should sit in on this, HR, because really everyone is using accounting system or some kind, not just accounting system, but an information system to process their data. So getting everyone on the same page is really important. But I really want to emphasize, because I'm sure we have some CFOs and controllers in the audience today, that actually you are very much so responsible for information security. For example, like I said, the accounting software, payroll, membership, donor databases, if people are going to websites and, adding in information and you're accepting donations, if your IT isn't managing that, someone needs to be responsible for making sure all of that is being executed. So it could be the executive director, the COO. We are seeing a virtual chief information security officer become a more popular solution, since it is pretty complex. There's a lot of regulation out there, especially in the privacy realm. Well, similar to how you might outsource your controllership or your accounting, you may want to outsource your information security to an expert, and that necessarily isn't the same person you outsource your servers to or your cloud. It might not be the same individual, because sometimes those IT providers aren't very well versed in privacy. So I'm kind of teeing you up to a little bit that we're going to be talking about later. We're going to be talking about third-party risk management, and we're going to be talking a little bit about privacy, but I just wanted you to think, as things are changing, your role may be changing as well.
I agree, Melissa, with that. And the role is changing so much, and the selection and the formation of committees is super important now. Because, as we all know, IT is evolving, and as IT evolves, also the schemes that are used by the hackers evolves much more rapidly. And something to keep in mind is, these hackers are devoting their time, 100+% of their time, to really just try to hack into the organization's systems. And just be mindful, it only takes one shot for them to be right, and it takes 100% of the time of the organization shots to be able to protect the organization. So we'll talk about a couple experiences here moving forward, but the committee or the selection of the people that are involved in this should really think about, how do they prevent unauthorized access? How do they monitor and evaluate the system? And again, monitoring and evaluating, it's almost like the organization has to always be acting as it's being hacked constantly. There's always somebody in the network looking at it, and that's really the way it needs to be behaving. How do they protect the sensitive data? And also, what are the consequences of a breach? They could be catastrophic. Organizations are gonna all of a sudden not be able to focus on their mission so much. Then they have to shift focus and go into, how do we fix this? How much money have we lost? And reputational damage, it's really critical. So something to keep in mind. Now, with that, that'll take us to the next polling question. So, Nathan?
Sure. So
Sorry.
So to your knowledge, has your organization experienced a cyber attack within the past year? And the options are yes, no, or unsure. So while everybody's answering the question, I'll provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word is value. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot down the words, because you'll need them for the survey at the end of the webinar. Again, the first CPE word is value, V-A-L-U-E.
All right, it looks like a few of you marked yes, and many of you have marked no, which I'm actually kind of surprised at, but that's really great news, actually. So 66%, and then 20% is unsure, because again, sometimes you just don't know who is in your systems at the time. Someone could be there right now, and that kind of gets us into the next slide that I'm going to be leading as soon as that comes up here. Okay, so just just so you're aware of, I know that there's been some studies done, and I thought this was really fascinating that, so like, let's say a hack happens and you have, IT specialists come in and they evaluate the hack and they look to see what was damaged in the ransomware and all these different things. But again, they didn't have their accounting hats on. And I think another way to identify if you've maybe been hacked is to look at accounting anomalies. We have seen, some unusual transactions that could be occurring. So there was a study done, and the FBI had concluded that Chinese hackers had penetrated a U.S. chemical company. And so what they did was, and this was several years ago, but they went back to research this because at first they're like, oh, there was a hack, and they got them out. But then they were able to identify, as they were looking back, that the hackers had intercepted inbound orders, outbound emails, was really messing with production, causing production delays, problems with their ordering for raw materials, and ultimately their price plummeted because of the struggles. And then a Chinese firm made a lowball offer for the U.S. company, and there was actually a lot of that happening throughout the United States several years ago. And what they were doing was they were sneaking in the back end and messing with things in order to buy off our company. So just something you to be aware of, accounting anomalies. It's not just about, kind of the fraud of an employee, but it could be a hacker in your system. And so that kind of tees us up to some other frauds that Ricardo is going to be talking about here soon.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, so that's a really good tee off, because now we wanted to just really point something that's really fresh off the press, and it really hit the headlines very recently here, especially this one. The Jewish Federation of Greater Washington was reported about $7.5 million hack, and this was recently reported by the Washington Post. So I welcome everybody to kind of like go to the Washington Post and take a look at this particular headline here. But again, if you look at the details of this, and obviously the investigation is still undergoing right now by the professionals, but it seems to be pointing to be a phishing attack, and this is critical. It talks about how easy these perpetrators are getting into organizations, are really making them fall for their ways of attacking them. So in fact, there was an organization called Malwarebytes, and it's an anti-malware software company, and they surveyed about more than 200 cybersecurity and IT professionals across the United States, and they found that 20% of those surveyed have faced a security breach as a result of remote work. So amazingly, this is just going to become more critical, and we have to be really careful, and organizations have to be really careful. And we'll get a little bit into the phishing and maybe ways to prevent it anyways. So another headline that has hit the wires recently, if we go to the next slide, is Blackbaud. So Blackbaud right now is actually facing a class action lawsuit because it was discovered that a data breach had hit them. So this is reported by the Nonprofit Times, very recent again, August 27, 2020. And this has been happening for a while. So again, it seems to be in a form of ransomware, and according to the Nonprofit Times. But again, it's still the research and the study and the investigation is still undergoing. But ransomware, another key topic that we hear constantly, and another area where crime is being perpetrated right now. So we can see, and the FBI is basically saying, if organizations are hit by ransomware, do not pay the fine, just because then chances are you're still not going to get the data back anyways. Let's go on to the next slide. So again, phishing, as we were talking about, it's about, the perpetration via email, phone, or a text message on how these perpetrators are obtaining information or portraying to be somebody else within the organization, so they get them to steal the information. And as we can see here, the employees are receiving an average of about 4 emails a day that perpetrate somebody else within the particular email. So, and this is really the biggest risk, employees. And the way to hopefully contain this is by employee training, security awareness training. And there are various tools that organizations can employ so that the employees who are pretty much the weakest link, how can they be trained? How can they be mindful when emails are coming in? pick up the phone, talk to somebody, as opposed to trying to get into the conversation with those perpetrators. Because once you start responding to those emails, it's over. They got the person, and the next thing you know, they're sending their personal information or they're wiring funds to the wrong people. And sometimes it's really hard to recuperate those funds. Ransomware is the next one. That's, we saw that the black bot is being hit by ransomware right now, and they're facing a class action lawsuit. So again, as the FBI was talking about in their report, organizations should not pay the ransomware because chances are they still are not going to get the data back. So it's just another thing that needs to be trained with the employees. A lot of this is coming in through email as well. Employees opening the attachments they're not supposed to be opening, clicking on the wrong links. So lots of training needs to be involved with this because it's the only way that organizations can actually stay up to speed and really teach their employees to be mindful and vigilant, with everything that's coming in the door, because it's going to become more and more prevalent. So with that, I think it's a good tee off to talk about privacy and being a critical concern. Melissa?
Oh, thank you, Ricardo. And for example, with the ransomware and facing litigation under any type of attack, it's important to be able to demonstrate that you were not negligent. And so we really talk with all of our clients about, we understand you're small, we understand this and that, but at the end of the day, if and when, and it's more likely when something happens, you don't want to be found negligent. So it's important to understand some of these concepts we're going to be talking about and at least have a documented information security policy. And also, and something else to really be thinking about is making sure you have multi-factor authentication at your banking. So let's say someone gets into your system and they take your data and all of that's awful, but you really don't want them also transferring money out of your accounts. So if there's a way for you to implement multi-factor at your third parties, I really encourage you to look into that. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to third-party risk management. But right now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, on the previous slide, cybersecurity, information security, and data privacy, and kind of the intersect between all of those, because they all really are connected. So cybersecurity is the protection of your computer systems and network from theft and damage and attacks. Information security is the practice of protecting information that you have within your organization, and that might be within your computers, and that's kind of how the hackers have been getting it. But this information can also be paper-based and word of mouth. And then when we talk about privacy, that's really the relationship between the collection of data and the public expectation of privacy, as well as legal issues surrounding the data. So this is all very interconnected.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and talking about interconnection and talking about the trust and the value, the reputation risk. So really organizations have to really have strong policies and procedures, especially in the area of IT and cybersecurity. What does the organization have to do in case it encounters a breach? And that's really something that's very critical, because you don't want to have an organization that all of a sudden is breached and the organization doesn't know what to do. Who's it going to call? Is it going to call legal counsel? How is it going to approach that particular breach? How do they notify their donors, employees? Who's got the responsibility of doing what? So it's a good idea to have strong policies and procedures to be able to follow, and also not just have them, but also review them very often and update them as necessary. Obviously, huge updates probably need to be warranted right now with the current environment. Again, as we were talking about, personal value versus legal requirements, and what is the cost of a breach or a non-compliance, and that's where the key is. As we saw at the beginning of the presentation, the cost has been escalating dramatically. I mean, we saw the Jewish Federation, losing about $7.5 million, and are they going to lose the full 7.5 million? Is there insurance to protect them? Do they have some kind of cyber insurance to really come in and hopefully help them, hit with that hit of 7.5 million? Hopefully. But I would assume that $7.5 million is definitely a big number for any size organization, and you want to be ready to act just in case something like that happens? Melissa?
Yeah, so when it comes to what we're talking about, when and if this happens, one of the things that they'll look at is privacy as well, because what kind of information is taken from you. You could have money taken, but then there could also be private information, or PII, personally identifiable information. And so we really want to take the time to talk to you about that, because it's on your website. It's public facing, it's out there. So, if you're accepting sensitive information over your website, maybe you have a portal or a login, or you're accepting donors, donations, and different things, you really should go to your website right now, because everyone can see it. So do you have a privacy policy? Should you have a privacy policy? And then we can get into GDPR. I'm sure you guys know all about that, but just in general, privacy. On your privacy policy, if you go through and read it, do you really do what it says? Because I have noticed that while everyone was scampering to comply with GDPR, they had some attorneys draft up the privacy policy, which is great, but what they hadn't done is really operationalized internally what they say they do on their website. So take a look at that, and if there's anything on there that you say you do that you're not really doing, that's a pretty major red flag. And if you say that you're maintaining minimum information security standards, but you don't have an information security policy, that's not good. Okay, so these are some really basic things that you need to do, because when something happens, and explicitly, it's an expectation that you have an information security policy. It doesn't need to be 20 pages long, but you do need to have something to tailor to the context and complexity of your organization. But if you're actually saying something to the public and you're not doing that, that's an even bigger problem. So just one of the takeaways for today is to go check that out and see where you stand on that. Now we're working from home. The privacy landscape may have changed a little bit, but private information can be held on electronic documents, paper documents. So it could be, if you have HIPAA compliance, that might look different. You may need to rewrite your information security policies in this new type of landscape. Information can be transmitted verbally, but possibly not on a secured line like it had been done before, and then personal emails and whatnot. So you may need to rewrite your policies through the lens of working from home.
And email is super interesting too, because this really shows, Melissa, obviously the flow of the data and the information that's out there, email being a critical one. We were just dealing with a client recently where somebody hacked into their email system and pretty much pretended to be one of their vendors and asked the CFO or somebody who handles their purchasing department to basically reroute their payments to a different account. And they basically did it because they thought it came from the right vendor and everything. So it shows how critical it is to keep track of, where the information is and how private is it kept by the organization. Thought I add that. So with that, also, we're talking about the negative media attention. I know this is a little bit of a older kind of like headline that came out a few months ago, probably it was last year sometime, where the Pentagon was hit by a major data breach. And interestingly enough, the Pentagon was the one that was all over the media on the headlines, but in reality, it was a third party that caused the situation. It was a vendor that was performing a small percentage, as we can see here, of the overall travel management services. And at the end of the day, it was actually the Pentagon that was all over the headlines. So something interesting to keep in mind. Organizations may think that, oh, it's a third party, we don't have to worry about it. They'll handle it correctly. But at the end of the day, if the third party is breached and something happens, it's the organization that's going to be all over the media. So that's why the third party risk management is super important nowadays.
It's a great lead in to what we're about to talk about. So I'm going to take some time and really kind of hammer away a little bit at third-party risk management, since it's really so critical right now. So as I talked about earlier, it used to be, everything was on your server and IT was handling it, and life was different back then. But now we have all these cloud providers and third parties, and who knows where data is going these days. And so as you can see, though, it's important, and it can be very helpful to have a cloud provider help you, because they may be able to fight the attacks better than you might be able to. But you can't really turn over the keys to someone. You still take on that responsibility, and as well as the negative publicity if something happens. So just as you used to have internal controls over the data that you managed, you now need to, if you're transitioning to a third party, you need to have internal controls over that relationship of the third party, because you could also be found negligent if you just pick a vendor and maybe lowest price, and you turn over all the sensitive data to them. You could be found negligent for that too. So we're going to go through some really important things that you may not already have set up that you really are going to want to. And so you're probably going to start to hear this term more if you haven't heard it already, but it's TPRM, third-party risk management. Some of the bigger organizations have kind of always had this in place. Now we're seeing the smallest of organizations definitely need to have this in place. And you definitely need to have this in place for your financial statement audit as well. You need to have it in place for your payroll provider, for your accounting solution in the cloud. You need to analyze that those vendors are doing what they should be doing, and so you need to perform some sort of due diligence annually for these organizations. Okay, so why implement TPRM? So obviously you'll reduce data breaches, operational failures, vendor bankruptcy is a big one right now during COVID. Do you have all your eggs in one basket? Could somebody that you're relying on go out of business, or could someone fall ill or something like that? You need to identify where those points are within your system. It's kind of a form of business continuity, and also reduce the likelihood of reputation damage, like the Pentagon example Ricardo showed. All right, so how do you kind of pinpoint those third-party risks? I know you might be a small organization, you don't really have the time or the individuals or the bandwidth, but what you really need to do is, every year you should perform some kind of risk assessment. We ask our clients, have you performed a risk assessment? And they said, oh yes, we have IT come in and they did some kind of scan of our network, or they did a penetration, and I think that's great, but you're missing a large part of the picture. You're missing all your third parties, and they're not scanning for that. And I'm trying to educate people on the fact that, do you really know who your third parties are? It used to be that you'd have a network diagram, and many are moving away from that because they don't really have a network anymore, but really it should be more of a third-party cloud diagram. What are all the different vendors that we're working with? And sometimes you actually have to go back and see who you've paid over the last couple of years. It's that disconnected now, because marketing may have their own cloud provider, HR has a cloud, and it's very disconnected. But really going through the exercise of finding out who all the vendors are, what vendors do have access to our systems, what vendors do we transmit sensitive information, what vendors have access to, who are we working with that could transfer cash out of our bank account? Like what are some of our different risks? And for those very key high level ones, and maybe you have 3 to 4, you should implement and conduct assessments annually on those at a minimum.
It shows really how it might be a daunting task, but it really shows how important it is to keep track of a centralized inventory system of all third parties, like Melissa's saying, and really get a handle on what kind of information they're handling. And now where everything seems to be now, I wouldn't say all over the place, but people are working in different locations now. It's much more important to really come up with a centralized inventory system for all third parties. I mean, Melissa, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely, because you're going to want to look at those contracts as well, and I'll get into that. So centralized contracts, we got to bring it all back somehow. because it really got, it's kind of all over the map in a lot of organizations. So it was like, it's like the Wild West, right, Ricardo?
It's the Wild West, and again, trying to avoid also emailing. I mean, when you start, like I said, we were discussing this with a client literally in a couple of days ago. Everybody's working from home, right? Oh, I'm here, somebody else is over here, somebody else is in Alaska, somebody else is in Africa. I don't know, I'm just exaggerating, obviously, but limit the email transaction. People are attaching emails that sometimes have sensitive information and talking about third-party risk management. People are watching these emails, people are streamlining these emails, and they're just finding the perfect moment to attack because they're monitoring every transaction that's happening, every conversation that's happening. They know what's happening. So that's why it's very important to really minimize the email transactions. That's one of my key takeaways for sure.
Absolutely. Getting on this vendor stratification example. So once you've identified all of your vendors that would have access to your system, so not just IT vendors, but cloud providers that you might not even think of as IT vendors, or someone that can access your system, like the HVAC vendor that caused the target attack. So let's figure out what they all are, and they're all very different. And so for tier 1, so I'm just talking about your top 10%. So I'm not asking you to do too much more, but for your top 10, I'm going to ask you to do certain things, and you really should be looking into them. Go on to the next slide, please. All right, so here's how you could design your own framework. You can put together a little policy and procedure on this. So as part of your risk assessment that you should be doing annually anyway, you should be doing an IT risk assessment, but third parties need to be included in that. For certain ones of them, maybe it's a IT vendor that you're using that's kind of, maybe a mom and pop shop, who knows? There's a lot of them out there, and they're very great and they're high quality, but are they struggling? Has COVID impacted them? Are they going to exist next year? So for certain vendors, you might want to ask them for their financial statements just to make sure they're solvent. Or, for example, and also you want to get their SOC report or some kind of, have they had an IT audit done? Or, we actually provide we provide scans of their systems to make sure that your third parties are actually, and we will actually do a brief demo of what we can provide at the end of this, but how are you making sure that your third party that you're trusting actually has up-to-date systems, and that they're patching things, or they're using the most up-to-date information? So you can actually scan them is one way to do it. Also, and I'm really gonna kind of hammer on this a little bit in the next couple slides, is a legal review. Really bind them by the contract. So I'm gonna kind of go through pretty quickly some of the things to think about. I'm not going to go through everything here. Hopefully you'll download these slides and you will have these as a reference for you. So here I just talk a little bit about the different things that you should expect to see within a contract with any cloud provider or IT. Responsibilities of the parties. What are the service level agreements going to look like? What are some penalties for lack of performance? Okay, who owns the data, audit rights, data security that they're going to maintain. There's been some changes to the language as far as GDPR goes. Make sure that there's appropriate language if you're transferring, sensitive data. You want to make sure they have some kind of baseline of insurance. Some dispute resolution clauses should be in there. Next slide. So you may have somebody that you've been working with for a very long time, and you have this super old contract. I ask you to dig it up and look at it. It may have some technology requirements that are outdated, because you want to make sure they're using the most up-to-date technology. It might talk about certain kinds of data breaches, but ransomware or new threats might not be specifically mentioned. So you just need to be careful. You don't want to get caught in some kind of legal loophole for these significant, again, this is for significant vendors, trying to really protect you. And a lot is happening in these contracts. I know that GDPR actually changed the definition of what is considered PII. So geolocators or someone's email address is actually considered sensitive information. So if you're under that regulation, you may need to have your contracts with those third parties specifically state that. So just something to think about there. You're going to want to, so when trying to identify what your critical vendors are, you're going to want to try to identify some high risk, activities, especially when we're talking about IT vendors. So do they have confidential data in a cloud-based system? Do you have data offshore? Like, where are they keeping this data? A lot of times data can't go from one location to another location. So where are their redundant servers at? Are there servers sharing data with other organizations, or is your data separate? Lots of things to think about, and what kind of third parties could access your data. So, and you always want to talk with them about how are they going to communicate with you when and if a data breach does happen. Do they have built-in redundancy? Do they have a plan for how it's going to be handled? What kind of cyber insurance do they have? So that kind of gets back to what's going on with Blackbaud. And as we continue to follow that story, as they're coming up with some litigation, I would be interested to see what their contracts look like with their customers, and if their customers are actually using some of these contract terms to be able to fight back if things weren't handled appropriately. So I'll be keeping a close eye as to how all of that pans out.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because talking about a little bit about audit practices in the cybersecurity environment for those organizations that receive federal funding, I know it's just a matter of time for those federal agencies to really come in and assess, or at least require organizations receiving federal funding to really have some set of policies and procedures, and in terms of privacy and so on and so forth, before they even get awarded funds in the future. So I personally believe it's just a matter of time. So for those organizations that are heavily dependent on those federal funds to come in, I would definitely look at it, look at the contracts, look at everything that's going on. How are they handling the third parties, like Melissa was just talking about? How is everything being documented, and so on and so forth? Because chances are those federal agencies may come in and say, well, we are not going to award you these funds unless you really have a strong policies and procedures in this area.
Great. And then the second polling question is, does your organization have some form of third-party risk management in place? The options yes, no, or unsure. And while you're answering the question, I'll provide the second CPE word. The second CPE word is fraud. If you want to receive CPE credit, please jot down these words, because you'll need them for the survey following the webinar. Again, the second CPE word is fraud, F-R-A-U-D.
All right, great. Looks like the majority do have some form of third-party risk management in place, which is great. Just want to remind you that I'm not just referring to when you engage someone as well, because I think that is very important to do a thorough vetting and during the RFP process, but then for particular ones to evaluate those annually. And another part of third-party risk management is looking at, and I'm just going to say this again, is looking at your banks. I know sometimes multi-factor can actually be turned off or turned on. I know it can be a pain sometimes, but if someone were to hack and were to gain access, you definitely don't want them transferring money out. So, want to make sure that you have multi-factor turned on, even for like different types of web-based transactions. So that would be part of your third-party risk management practice. All right, so just really kind of wrapping up, the third-party risk management is for certain of your key vendors, you should have some kind of service level agreement in place. If you don't have that, you should request it, and you should get it, and you should demand a certain level of quality assurance. And if there are some kinds of disruptions, you need to work through that with them and maybe even get a reduction in your rates. So I would say pay close attention to what's in your service level agreement and hold them accountable, and maybe even the following year make adjustments to it if you don't like the quality of service that you're receiving. And on the next slide is just some more things to think about. How are the issues resolved? How are they reporting incidents and notification of scheduled downtime? So just making sure that you're happy with your third parties. So just a reminder that competition is good. Don't decide on a vendor too early in the process, and also best price does not equal best vendor. You really want to make sure you're focusing on meeting your requirements. So something very important to do is to audit your own third party. So many of you said you had third party risk management in place. I would urge you to actually look through that process and to see what exactly are you doing. Is there a way to improve? It's all about continuous improvement. So what are you doing? What are you requesting? How can you improve what you're doing? And then also you want to be requesting audits of your vendors. And a lot of those are possibly even just listed on their websites. You may not want to engage with someone unless they have some kind of SOC audit done on their infrastructure annually. You may even in some situations be found negligent if you engaged with someone that didn't have something like this, or for example, someone that wasn't PCI compliant, you could be found negligent because that's just an industry standard. And I know that Ricardo would agree with me on that one.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
All right.
And it's all about, like you were saying, Melissa, it's all about really putting your best foot forward. I mean, you get organizations like Target. I know I picked on Target with their breach a few years ago that have billions of dollars or millions of dollars dedicated to their IT and their cybersecurity, and they still get breached. So, when you have small organizations, and when I say small, it could be, in the millions of dollars still, the chances are even higher. But it's all about showing that you've done your best effort. You've crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's, and you've done everything possible. And that's going to limit the litigation process as opposed to just not doing anything.
Absolutely. So in conclusion, for third-party risk management, which is absolutely a part of cybersecurity and information security and privacy, you want to inventory all your third-party vendors, which Ricardo emphasized, and what that relationship is with them. You may need to go back through who you paid over the past couple of years to find out who they are, just because procurement really isn't centralized. You'll want to also centralize your contracts and look through with them, and then do an assessment on the cybersecurity or privacy risk exposure from those third parties, and then develop a system to assess, like I said, possibly your 10% threshold. So I'm not asking you to do this for all of them, but for your riskiest ones. I'm always a fan of risk-based because we don't have all the time in the world to do all this, but at a minimum, your riskiest ones, you should do certain procedures, because at the end of the day, this is actually part of a requirement for you to do. You could be found negligent if you just turned over the keys to a third party. It will come back at you. So you want to document that you're doing something. And then also for your own business continuity benefit, contingency plans for third parties that are could be going out of business or low quality, or maybe a data breach or ransomware occurs at that organization. We're seeing the biggest and the best of organizations get attacked right now. It used to be move your stuff to the cloud, it's more secure, and I'm starting to question that now as I see some of the biggest and best names get attacked. So no matter what, don't think you're free. You need to come up with a backup plan for anything where you have all your eggs in one basket.
Agree. So with that takes us into some of next steps, which discuss the IT strategy for the organization. So something to really keep in mind. And really, we've talked about this already during the presentation, but just to kind of highlight some of the key takeaways here. Organizations really need to be assessing the IT infrastructure, and really this has to be done very often because things change very quickly. You add a new device, you add a new software, you integrate a new third party, that's changing the IT infrastructure already, believe it or not. So assessing, creating the policies and procedures that are needed, training, and finally monitoring. So those are key things, key items to keep in mind as organizations evolve during this COVID pandemic. Also implementing, next slide, implementing the proper controls. So organizations really need to understand the threats. So the patch applications, I know Darren is key into these patch applications within the system. They need to be tested before they're applied, because believe it or not, sometimes those patches are applied and then next thing you know, people are out of the network, or they don't have email, or something is happening. So it's key for the IT team to be testing those patches before they're applied to the network, making sure there's not going to be any huge complications. The automation where possible. Again, humans, when we get into things, we tend to mess things up a little bit. So if we can let the systems do everything automatically as much as possible with the humans obviously monitoring the systems, then it's going to create for a better control environment, creating a proper physical security, software security with the multi-factor authentication that we were bringing up. And again, managing the vendor risks. Melissa talked deeply about this, the third-party risk. I would think as one resource here is the CIsecurity.org is a great nonprofit organization that provides some great tools for control implementation. So I would highly recommend everyone to really go to their website and spend some great time there, because you'll be surprised what you get. So with that, we'll go to the next polling question here. We're getting close to the end.
Yep, and the third and last polling question is, has your organization had an independent cybersecurity assessment done recently? And the answers are yes, no, or unsure. And while you're submitting your answers, I'll provide the final CPE word. The final CPE word is liability. If you want to receive CPE credit, please make sure you jot down this word, because you'll need it for the end of the survey following the webinar. Again, the final CPE word is liability. Liability.
Interesting results here. So we have about 60% of the organizations who have not done an independent cybersecurity assessment. And I'm gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna fly through the next couple of slides because I want Darren to really spend a couple of minutes on the cybersecurity assessment that we do provide our clients, and it's had some highly reviews from the organizations that we provided this service to. But again, IT strategies, some of the useful technologies, we talked about this, remote management, password policy, the SANS 20 critical security controls. Again, organizations don't really have to apply all of this in this particular order, but these are some good areas where it could start, like for example, penetration testing, data recovery capability, controlled use of administrative privileges, boundary defense. I mean, these are great pointers that the SANS 20 have really brought up to the attention. So I highly recommend IT teams and folks to really look at this and, just pick one, the highest risk, and start with it, right? So with that, some of the summary of the key takeaways here, we talked about this already. And I wanted to have Darren show us a little bit about the cyber scorecard that we provide to our clients. And it's a good sort of like independent assessment of the IT teams within organizations. And I'll let Darren talk about that. And many times the teams at IT are sort of like reluctant to get this done within the organizations because they think that somebody's looking over their shoulders, and it is. But at the end of the day, it provides some great recommendations, and a lot of those IT folks have come back and said, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I didn't know we had this issue, and we've been able to resolve it, and they can also sleep better at night, right? So Darren, why don't you go ahead right in and spend a couple minutes, talking to the audience about this great tool that we offer our clients.
Sure. And so this is a demo account that I'm using. So this is showing CenturyLink.com. And here we can see what we scan. So this is a scan that grabs information from all of the internet, because information is being grabbed. If you write something on social media and delete it, it doesn't mean it's actually gone. Someone will find it eventually and hopefully not use it against you. But here we're going to go through CenturyLink. So some of the big red areas, because obviously that's what everybody looks at first, is patch management. So I've already opened it up. So it's showing all the different vulnerabilities that their systems have. And like I said, this is information just grabbed from the internet. So if you know where to find it, you can grab this. So as you see, they're using Windows Server 2008 R2. That has been decrepit, or that has been end of life by Microsoft, I think 4 or 5 years ago. I can't get the years exactly right all the time. But 4 or 5 years ago, they've stopped supporting it. They're no longer giving out patches. It's almost like the Windows XP that everybody had to get off of. And another one is,
Fraudster, if someone wanted to attack you, they could just scan this and they can see that you're running on outdated systems. So this is something, you want to know this because a fraudster already knows this about you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and having a D score, it's almost like a kid from kindergarten could break into the organization's network, by the way. So you want to get more than that.
Right, exactly. And some other things that it scans for is leaked credentials. Best practices: do not use your work email or your association email or your organization or work email for, say, Netflix or your banking or things like that. It should only be used for work-related items, because the likelihood that everybody uses the same password in 2 locations or 3 locations is very high. It's not recommended, but people do it because it's simple and it's easy to remember one password. But in the likelihood that Netflix or Facebook gets hacked and the credentials are plain text, and that's just like a notepad or a Word document, that password, a person's password, is there. So now I know your work email, the likelihood that you use that same password is probably pretty high. So instead of having to phish somebody and relying on someone to help me get into your network, you've already given me 2 answers potentially. The next one we can look at is hacktivist shares. So is places on the dark web, are they talking about your organization? Are they saying, hey, I've gotten in this way? So this is another thing that we'll scan and check for you. Another one, with Melissa speaking about your privacy policy and how important privacy is. This will also scan your privacy policy and actually see, do you have certain sections that apply for GDPR or the California Consumer Protection Act? It looks for it, and it actually gives insight of how you can mitigate these things. So it gives you verbiage to put in your privacy policy if you want to just make sure you have something in there to try and protect yourself, and then go back and fill it in and have it done with a legal counsel. And these are some different ones throughout this.
So yeah, this is a really summary and snapshot of what the cyber scorecard can provide to organizations, and really provide some low-hanging fruit on applications that either need to be updated or policies that need to be updated and strengthened, if you will, to be in compliance with many other legal regulations. But again, you'd be surprised how inexpensive this is. And a lot of this is available to everyone out on the web anyway. So highly recommend it. If you want to look more into this, definitely reach out to us. Our email addresses and all our contact information is at the end of their PowerPoint presentation, but we'll be happy to help.
And one quick thing to add, since this is not a penetration test, you can run this on your third parties and not have any legal repercussions for you doing something on their network. This is taking information that is already on the internet and compiling it for you for management, for a clean, simple, easy view. And you can run it on yourself as well.
And this would be part of the whole third-party risk management that Melissa was talking about, incorporate it in there and share it with them. And you can say, well, unless you get a B or some kind of score, then we're not going to transact business with you guys. So something to really think about.
Well, I know we're just out of time. Nathan, if you want to go back to so I want to thank everybody for coming out today and listening to this webinar. And we will have upcoming events, and you see Melissa and Ricardo's emails at the bottom there. You can write them down, shoot them any questions you may have, and they'll be happy to follow up with you. Or if you have questions about the cybersecurity scorecard, they can assist you with that as well.
Do we have any questions that we need to address? I know we're just a little past over the timeline, but we'll be happy to entertain any questions. If not, then definitely reach out to us, and we'll be happy to have a conversation on a one-on-one for sure. But with that, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend our webinar today. Hopefully everybody's doing well and staying healthy. I'm sure that's what everybody's hearing nowadays during these unusual times. But thank you once again. I'm sure Melissa wants to say goodbye as well. And we're happy that everybody could join us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. And it's an honor and a privilege to be of service. So feel free to reach out. We love to be of help.
Thank you, everyone. And this will be recorded, as Darren was saying, and everybody can just go back to our website and watch it soon here. So an email will be sent out when the recording is available. Thank you, everyone. Take care.